the life and intellectual background of Michel Foucault. Now we are going to read about the major works of Foucault. So, since its beginnings with Socrates, philosophy has typically involved the project of questioning the accepted knowledge of the day. Later, Locke, Hume, and especially Kant developed a distinctively modern idea of philosophy as the critique of knowledge. Kant's great epistemological innovations was to maintain that the same critique that revealed the limits of our knowing powers could also reveal necessary conditions for their exercise. What might have seemed just contingent features of human cognition, for example, the spatial and temporal character of its perceptual objects, turn out to be necessary truths. Foucault, however, suggests the need to invert the Kantian move rather than asking what is the apparently contingent is actually necessary. He suggests asking what in the apparently necessary might be contingent. The focus of his question is the modern human sciences, that are the biological, psychological, and social. These purport to offer universal scientific truths about human nature that are in fact often mere expressions of ethical and political commitments of a particular society. Foucault's critical philosophy undermines such claims by exhibiting how they are the outcome of contingent historical forces, not scientifically grounded truths. Each of his major books is a critique of historical reason. So, first important work is Histories of Madness and Medicines, which he talks about the history of madness in classical age, and the psychology and works in Persian mental hospital and his own psychological problems, because he has written so much things over medical and psychological sciences. That's why he had written it. And next, history, birth of clinic, he also has written this. In the order of things, this is the book which actually made Foucault famous, which was known as Les Mots et les Choses. It is in many ways an odd interpolation into development of his thought. Its subtitle, An Archaeology of the Human Science, suggests an expansion of the earlier critical histories of psychiatry and clinical medicine into their modern disciplines such as economics, biology, philology. And indeed, there is an extensive account of various empirical disciplines of the Renaissance and the classical age, thus precedes that modern human sciences. Next, the classical representation, where he talks from Descartes to Kant during what he calls the classical age actually. So, he draws a map of classical representation and the classical views and how the ideas are represented is as an object. Now, after this, another important work is Kant's critique of classical representation. Because we do not have it in our syllabus, we are not going to discuss these at detail. Okay. Next is the language of man. Yes, this was important to understand the concept of Foucault. At this point, the order of things introduces the two central features of thought after Kant, the return of language and the birth of man. Our discussion above readily explains why Foucault talks of a return of language. It now has an independent and essential role that it did not have in the classical view. But the return is not a monolithic phenomenon. Language is related to knowledge in diverse ways, each of which corresponds a distinctive sort of return. So, for example, the history of natural language has introduced confusion and distortions that we can try to eliminate through techniques of formalization. On the other hand, the same history may have deposited fundamental truths in our languages that we can unearth only by the methods of hermeneutic interpretation and as an autonomous reality. Okay. So, Foucault suggests language is truth unto itself, speaking nothing other than its own meaning. This is the realm of pure literature, evoked by Malam when he answered Nietzsche's question, who is speaking, with language itself. In contrast to the Renaissance, however, there is no divine word underlying and giving unique truth to the words of language. Literature is literally nothing but language, rather than many languages speaking for and of themselves. Okay, and even more than important than language is the figure of man, which he said it was not found in the classical ages. Rather, It was like the epistemological concept was not present in the earlier times. Now, Foucault illustrates his point through a striking discussion of Descartes' cogito, showing why it is an indubitable certitude within the classical episteme, but not within the modern episteme. Okay. Then next, his important work is the Analytic of Finitude, where he talks about consciousness and unconsciousness. That is a more philosophical term. He talks about Kant, Hegel here. Next important work of Foucault is From Archaeology to Genealogy. I'm skipping the works because they are not in our syllabus and we do not need to get confused, because Foucault writes with a kind of passion which is not easy to understand. Next, he writes the History of Prison, that was published in 1975, and then he writes about history of modern sexuality. Excuse me. The history of modern sexuality. Foucault's history of sexuality was originally projected as fairly straightforward extension of the genealogical approach of discipline and punish to the topic of sexuality. His idea of the various modern fields of knowledge about sexuality, that is various science of sexualities, including psychoanalysis. Okay, it has an intimate association with power structures of modern society. Okay, on Foucault's account, modern control of sexuality parallels modern control of criminality by making sex, like crime, an object of allegedly scientific disciplines, which simultaneously offer knowledge and domination on their objects. Okay, and next, in this series, he writes one more work, and that is known as Sex in the Ancient World. His final engagement with traditional philosophy arises from turn toward ancient world, where he took in the last few years of his life, the history of sexuality. Now, Foucault after Foucault. Foucault left instructions that there should be no posthumous publication of his writings, that he had not published in his lifetime, but Foucault had allowed tapping of his lectures, and his estate decided that this amounted to the permission to publish edited versions of his public lectures based on his notes and tape recordings. This decision has allowed print editions of the annual courses of lectures that he delivered at Collège de France. And actually, the lecture which we have, the essay which we have in our syllabus, is also related to some of these lectures. This has made an enormous body of important material available. Some of it covers work later published, but some present ideas that appeared nowhere else. This is Foucault after Foucault. So Foucault is something not easy to understand, not easy to grasp, and so wide. So we'll soon go through the work which we have in our syllabus, the essay on post-structuralism, related to post-structuralism. Thank you very much.